Well, it's lovely to be here. And so maybe I should say a little bit about myself as well, since you guys have all been really kind in sharing about yourselves. So I've been a nun for about 24 years. So before I was a nun, I was living in Melbourne, studying university. And it's like really when I was at university, I became a bit interested in Buddhism, and I would go to some classes and that kind of thing. And then I moved up to Queensland, which is in the north part of Australia. And there's a big Buddhist centre up on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland called Chenrezig Institute, which I think was the first FPMT centre maybe that was built in Australia. So back in, long time ago. They had their 30th anniversary. Was it? Oh, anyway, 50th? I don't know. It was a very big anniversary recently. And so that's where I met my teacher. And then I stayed there and I lived there for about 15 years. So I studied the entire of the basic program there more than once. And then I took on the role of tutoring for the basic program. And then we started doing some of the master's program as well. So we did the middle way studies from the master's program. So I was tutoring for that as well. And yeah, living in the nuns community there for a lot of years. And then my teacher, he was called to India by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, for 6 years. And when he came back to Australia, then he started a small centre in Brisbane. So he asked me if I'd come down and help with the program and also help with translating because I speak Tibetan as well. And so I've been doing that for the last 10 years and also teaching at various FPMT centres as well. And yeah, so here I am in Brisbane doing what I do. Yeah. Okay, so let's start off our session here with correcting our motivation. So it's really important that whatever we do, whatever positive activity, whatever virtuous activity we do, whether it's our study, whether it's our meditation, also any other positive activity that we do, that we try and make sure that we bring a really good motivation to that activity. So the way that we do that in the Buddhist tradition is to start off with usually some prayers. So for this class, we'll just start off with reciting the four immeasurables together. So the four immeasurables is really all about bringing those positive qualities to mind of loving kindness, of compassion, taking to mind like all beings. So we can think that all sentient beings are surrounding us. And what we're doing in this class here and our study and our reflection of it afterwards is that we want that whatever we do, whatever virtue we accumulate through this process, that it goes towards really improving the lot of all these many, many beings so that they have happiness, so that they become free from suffering, so that they can attain enlightenment and liberation, and so that they have this equanimity that is without attachment and hatred, so that their minds become more and more peaceful, more and more loving, more and more caring. So that's really our aspiration for all of our virtuous practices, that it goes towards that goal. So having that in mind, then let's just slowly recite through these four immeasurable thoughts together. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Okay. All right. So our topic for these classes, so we've got 4 classes, and our topic is the 4 types of patience. So patience is like a big topic in Buddhist philosophy, massive. And it needs to be because our anger is so ingrained. So patience is the thing that's going to counteract our anger. And our anger is so ingrained, we need to be able to attack it from multiple viewpoints, from multiple perspectives. So, and because anger is so destructive, we need lots and lots of tools at our disposal for our patience. So you could really study patience, for your entire life. I think it's like a lifetime practice. There are so many tools to learn, so many tools to become familiar with, so many tools to put into practice that it really is, it's a big project. But whatever we do learn, what's important is that we really understand it well and that we actually go about putting it into practice. We actually go about applying it to our minds. That's how we get the benefit. So it's important with any of our studies, of course, any of them, is to take what we learn and make sure we actually apply it to our mind, that we actually utilize it, not just leave it as an intellectual understanding, because intellectual understanding is all very well, but that alone is not actually going to transform our minds and make a change to the way we experience life. So it's really important. So in these classes, usually when you look at the way that patience is presented from the Lam perspective, those of you who've done a bit of study of Lam might have heard of it before, come across it before. So usually it's presented in terms of 3 divisions of patience. So that's the general presentation. So I thought we'd just take a little bit of a different tack in these classes and look at it in terms of this presentation of the 4. So in terms of this presentation of the 4 types of patience, then you will have, by the end, I hope, if all goes well, you'll have like sort of these 4 types that you can hold on to, that you can relate all your other study of patience to, and that you can remind yourself of when you start to feel your mind starting to become a little bit maybe disgruntled, maybe anger is on the horizon. So you've got something there in your pocket you can bring out. What were those 4 types of patience? What can I apply of my understanding of those 4 in this moment? So that's my hope. Excuse me. So the reason why we need to study patience really is because the challenges in life that act as like the focal conditions for our anger are so, so very many. It's like we will never have, I think, a problem of trying to find a difficult situation that might, lead us to get angry in relation to it. So there are like all sorts of various issues that we might have in life, from very small ones, like, for instance, somebody jumping into the queue ahead of us. It's quite easy to get angry at that. Or somebody cutting you off at traffic, leads to road rage, very common side effect, isn't it? And then there are sort of the more, bigger difficulties in life, when people speak to you badly, speak to you rudely, maybe they badmouth you at work, maybe they're manipulative. So these kinds of things happen. And then there are the really big traumas that we experience in life, those really major traumas when you end up with quite big sufferings of body and mind as a result of what others do. So these are things that we will inevitably experience in life. We can't stop all of that from happening. We try, right? We try and organize our lives so that we can avoid all these little difficulties in life, as well as the big difficulties in life. I'll change this, I'll change that. I won't be around that person. I'll make sure I'm more with this person. I'll change my job. I'll change where I live. So we're always trying to avoid these challenges of life. But it's actually impossible to avoid all challenges in life. It's really difficult. especially when you look at it from the Buddhist karmic perspective, which is, that our karma is going to throw up from time to time challenges across the board because of actions that we've created in the past, right? Yeah, so if you're looking at it from a Buddhist perspective, that's how it is. If you're just thinking about it from your own perspective of living through your life now, from your experience, you say, from the time I was born up until this point in my life, then, I've encountered all sorts of difficult situations. I've been angry so many times. I've been frustrated. I've been irritated so many times in life. So we know from our own experience in this life that that's how it is, right? So what do we want to achieve then? Ideally, what we want to achieve is happiness, isn't it? We want to achieve happiness, which is not just about this sort of excited mind, where everything's like rosy and flowers and all of that. Real happiness comes from having a contented mind, a peaceful mind. That's what real happiness is, in fact, isn't it? In the world today, there is this idea that happiness comes from, or happiness is really that real excitement thing. It's like when you go on holiday, you're going to that place that you really, really wanted to go to, and then you're really, really happy. That's what we kind of consider happiness in worldly terms. But if you think about it, real happiness is not having a disturbed mind. It's having a peaceful mind. And it's having control over our mind as well. That's real happiness. So that's what we're striving for. And one of the major obstacles for us having that kind of happiness, that peace of mind, that calmness of mind, is our anger. So when you look at these two together, patience and anger, patience is really that undisturbed state of mind. Whereas anger is quite a disturbed state of mind, isn't it? Like if you think about it from your own perspective, what's your mind like when you get angry? I mean, that's a question actually for you guys. What is your mind like when you get angry?
I don't like my mind. I don't like
Sorry?
myself. I don't like myself when I'm angry. Ugh.
You don't like yourself? Or do you just not like your mind?
I don't like my actions.
You don't like your actions, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so where do your actions come from?
Stupidity. Straight up. Yeah. I am working on it.
Well, they come from our mistakes, don't they? They come from the mistaken ways that we think about things. And dependence upon that mistaken way of thinking about things, then we act out. So we act out negatively in our body and we act out negatively in our speech. So, speech is a big one for us, I think. It's perhaps we're able to restrain the negative actions of body a little better. Probably none of us go around killing other people, I hope. I mean, you never know, but hopefully you're able to restrain yourself from killing another person. Whether you might have at some point in your life maybe hit another person, well, sometimes you might have that kind of experience. Maybe you will have like what's another kind of action? You might have like raised your fist or made some rude action with your hands, right? Might have done that, right? These are physical actions. But with our speech, I mean, that just falls out of our mouth, doesn't it? So easily, those negative speech patterns that we have. Somebody says something nasty to you, and just straight away, like just without you even thinking about it really consciously, something comes out. You say something mean back to them. Yeah. So these actions, whether they're verbal actions, some kind of bad speech, or some kind of physical action, then these come about in dependence upon the mistakes that we make in our own mind. And anger is like one of the big mistakes. Yeah. So yeah, you don't like your actions when you're angry. So how about anybody else? What's your mind like when it's angry? Or what do you like? What does it feel like? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
I feel I lose control. It's like yeah. do, feel, say things that I don't want to, and a strong sense of then disappointment, because I have gotten to, I've overcome anger a bit, and then to suddenly something happens and I'm triggered and it's gone, and the ability to control it. That's disappointment big time.
Yeah, I think you'd not be alone in that one. Anger is like incredibly strong. It's so strong, and we're so familiar with it in our mind. It's just waiting there for a condition so that it can pop out, and it takes control entirely. That's what it does. And once it's there in your mind, it's really hard to stop it, isn't it? It's like once the anger's become present, it's not like you can just like flick a switch and go, oh, I think I'll actually, think nice things about this person now. Like that doesn't happen, does it? There's no way. You kind of need to then take a breather. Maybe you need to go for a walk. You need to like listen to maybe listen to some teachings that might be helpful, something like that, to try and bring your mind back from that extremity that it's gone to with the anger, to bring it back to a bit more of a calmer state before you can start to think about, well, what's a positive way that I can view this situation, right? So when anger comes in, it really takes control. It's the leader. Yeah. Lakme, were you going to add something?
Yeah, so when I get angry, it's about somebody being wrong and me being right, and I'm finding all possible ways to prove them much more worse than what they actually were, and prove myself to be fantastic.
Yep. Yep, I think we can all relate to that one, that one as well. That's right. When anger comes up, definitely it's like the other person is 100% wrong. We are 100% right. That's exactly what happens. So this is one of the things that we'll talk about in relation to anger, is how it is actually what we call a wrong consciousness. So it's like a big mistake in consciousness. If we can understand how that is the case, then that helps us to really start to develop an even stronger wish to get rid of the anger in our mind. Yeah. So, yeah, Christine?
I was going to say, well, because I have a bad problem with criticism, and when people would criticize me or stuff, then I would get more of the go, keep, I can forget the word, live it over and over, making myself angrier and angrier, and wanting to find a way to get back at the person, but you never really did. And, yeah, because it's like, because I feel like, self-centered thought got in the way. And I've been doing better with that though. So, and I've, it's not bothering me as much. And so that's what I used to do with anger.
Yeah, so you've actually touched on a really important point there, is that together with anger, we have this process of like overthinking that goes with it as well, usually. Like, I mean, quite often when we first get angry, there's this like immediate, the event happens and then straight away you're angry. It's almost like there's no intervening time. Sometimes there is a bit of an intervening time. There's this slow build up. There's an event, and then there's like slow build up as you think more and more and more and more and more about it, until it gets to the point, right, now I'm angry. But then often once you've gotten angry, then there is this continuation of the anger that goes on, that we'd actually call resentment. Yeah. And there is this process, this continual process of what I think in psychology terms they call rumination, right? In Buddhist philosophy, we would call improper mental attention. So there is this like constant thing of like you're rehashing over the situation again and again and again, but you're not doing it logically. You're just like continuing those thoughts of anger, or all the thoughts that support your anger. You're allowing them to remain in your mind, and you're not confronting them in any way. And so that continuum of anger, that resentment, just sits and, eats away at your mind. And on that basis, then your anger builds and builds and builds. Yeah. Yeah. So this is another factor of the anger. So it's not only the anger itself that's unpleasant to have within our mind. While you have all those negative thoughts that go together with the anger, that rumination, or what we call that improper mental attention, those are also quite unpleasant to have in your mind, aren't they? You know, it's like times when if you think of another time when actually your mind has been quite relaxed, has been quite calm, maybe has even been quite loving, you know, and you've really had this strong sense of love, compassion. I don't mean like, you know, relationship type love. I mean like real love, which is focused on another person, that wants them to be happy. That really pure type of love, loving kindness, we would call it. So when you have that pure type of loving kindness towards another being, when that arises in your mind, you don't have all that agitation that comes with the anger, do you? Your mind is quite peaceful. Your mind is calm. Your mind is actually even buoyant, you might say. The feelings that go together with that are more likely to be pleasant type feelings, not unpleasant type feelings. So these are some of the really big issues with anger, you know, so the ones that you've hit on just now, a lot to do with the way that anger makes us feel when it arises in our own mind. And it's a good thing to think about how anger makes us feel so awful when it arises in our own mind, how our mind becomes so tight, becomes so unpleasant. There is this feeling of mental suffering, and how unpleasant it is to have that within our mind. But there are other things that we can think of in relation to anger that are also good to remember, you know, in terms of the faults of anger. So we have things like, for instance, you know, if when you're angry, do other people like to be around you? No, no one likes to be around an angry person. Like, you can think of people that you know of in your life that are, you know, you think of as being quite angry people. You're a bit sort of hesitant of them, aren't you? Like, oh, I don't know, if I say this thing to that person, they'll probably get angry. You can't just relax in their presence. In fact, sometimes people can be actually, you know, quite kind to others around them, or they might be generous to others around them. But because their nature is they have quite an angry nature, people don't like actually to be around them, even though they might be quite a generous person. So there's instances, for instance, where people have even, you know, like children might even harm their parents. So the parents, very kind, taking care of the children, you know, when they were like tiny babies, for instance. But perhaps the parents are actually very angry people, and the children might, in the end, harm those parents, forget about the kindness, and actually harm the parents. There are instances where that can happen. Also, you tend to not have many friends if you're an angry person, right? Your friends, you might have a few friends and then they leave you very quickly. So these are all, you know, big faults of anger. What are some other ones? Maybe we can say anger harms your health. So I think that's quite well documented these days, isn't it? Anger has an effect on your heart, has an effect on your circulation system, probably has an effect on your gut, because what happens in terms of the brain and the gut are very interrelated, aren't they? So if you have some kind of negative issues going on with your brain, like with your anger, that's probably going to influence your gut as well. What else? What else can we think of that are big faults? You don't sleep well? That's another one, isn't it? If you're very angry, have you ever tried, after a day of having a really frustrating day, and you've maybe gotten angry quite a bit, and you've got that rumination going on in your mind, and you go and you try and lie down and have a sleep? Does sleep come? Sleep doesn't come, does it? It's very hard to sleep if you're angry. Or you might go to sleep, but then you'll end up, you know, having these terrible dreams because your mind is so disturbed. Jay, do you have a question? Is that your hand up?
Yeah, it is. And it's sort of a question, but it's more of a comment. It's like, I know that it feels different. There is a certain type of anger sometimes I feel like, which is energizing me. Yeah. It doesn't have the same kind of edge to it that, you know, and by the way, when I go to glory, one of my biggest achievements will be, no, I've never shot anybody as much as I might have wanted to, yeah, and fantasized about it. So that's St. Peter. I'm going to tell him straight away, honey, that's what I did. But it's like there is a certain energy that I'll get it together that, yeah. So I have mixed feelings about that medical stuff on anger. I understand, and I think we're talking about maybe righteous anger can be channeled in a positive manner. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're totally going to talk about that, because first of all, we need to actually identify what anger is itself, in fact. So you're spot on. So the interesting thing that you brought up there is that you haven't shot anyone. So that's an excellent start, I would say. But then you said also, even if you'd wanted to. So the interesting thing there is that we say, from a Buddhist perspective, anger is it's a mental event. So what happens in your mind is like the kind of fundamental thing. That's the crux of it. So you might not have done a physical action of shooting somebody, but if you did, and I know you were joking, right? But say you actually had the desire to shoot somebody, to kill somebody, there already you have anger is in your mind. So you've already got the anger, even though you haven't acted out on it. So together with that, from a Buddhist perspective, when we think about karma, so some of you might be a bit more new to this idea of karma. We'll talk about it a bit, as we go on. But in terms of the Buddhist presentation, then we would say, as soon as you have that anger in your mind, even if you haven't acted on it, then already you've accumulated negative karma. Already, just with it being in your mind. So especially if it's like a thought to kill, that's quite a big one. So in that case, you've already, if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to kill this person, or I'd like to kill this animal, for instance, you already there have essentially an intention to kill, even if you haven't acted it out in your body physically. So what we want to try and do is not just stop these physical actions, which we already have a little bit of control over. We want to stop even the mental actions, because we want to stop accumulating that negative karma on a mental level. And if we stop it from that perspective, then we'll also just naturally stop these physical actions and the verbal actions that come about independence upon it. But then to address your other point there, so you're talking about that energy that comes with anger. Well, with maybe some types of anger. And when you say righteous anger, I presume it's like you might be thinking of that what we would term anger, in the sense that might motivate you to go and protest, for instance. So if you see an injustice in the world and you're thinking, right, well, my only avenue to really do anything about this in an immediate sense is to go and make my voice heard. So I'm going to go and protest. And you're quite frustrated that this is happening, that there is this injustice, that there is this suffering. And so through that motivation, then you're kind of like propelled to go and do that action of protesting, for instance. That's the kind of thing you're talking about, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah. So whether that actually involves anger or not is something that we need to investigate. So yes, I mean, in a sense of the English language, then we might say that there's a righteous anger involved there. But what we want to make sure is that when we talk about anger being so negative from a Buddhist perspective, is this righteous anger actually the anger within Buddhism, or is it something else? That's one thing. The other thing we need to investigate is, if we don't have anger, does that mean therefore our actions won't have power? That's the other question, right? So, okay, so I'll come back to this in a minute, but just to go back to these faults of anger, because what's really important when we're trying to work at reducing our anger is we need to really see how incredibly negative anger is. If we don't see how negative it is, like you guys have all come to this class because you understand, you know that you need patience and you want to reduce your anger, right? You can see to some extent that the anger is having a negative impact on your life and you want tools to be able to deal with that. So you've already got that foundation there. But we want to make sure that is really, really strong so that we want to get rid of anger entirely. We don't want even a tiny snippet of it left in our mind. That's where we want to get to. And the best way to develop that really strong motivation that's going to see us through all the challenges that we're going to face in life, all the challenges that we need to practice patience in relation to, is by understanding and being convinced within ourselves that anger is like so incredibly negative that we don't want even the tiniest little bit of it. So we do that through understanding really thoroughly what the faults of anger are. So we've talked about quite a few of these visible faults of anger, ones that we know from our own experience, so that our mind is unhappy. There's an unpleasant feeling that comes with it when we have anger in our mind, together with that rumination that occurs. Also, it can affect our health. It can affect our sleep. So it affects our general well-being. It affects our relationships with people. So it affects our relationships with our friends, with our family, with our partner. All of those relationships definitely get affected by anger. So often when you get angry and you say things like we mentioned, someone mentioned before, that regret, right? So the regret comes sometimes way too late, when you've done something on the basis of your anger, or you've said something to somebody that you're close to, and you can't repair that relationship because it's been such a big thing that's happened, right? You can't take it back to where it was before because the other person's been so hurt by what you've said or what you've done. Yeah, so it can really have a big impact, and like an impact that we can't come back from on our relationships with others. So yeah, there are all these visible faults of anger. Now, also from the Buddhist perspective, we say there are also invisible faults of anger. And it's good to reflect on these, to whatever extent you're able to. So if these are new ideas to you, just bear them in mind. And then over time, as you do more study, then you'll be able to get a better understanding of what these invisible faults of anger actually are, and how they work, and have a think of them in your own mind. How does it work? Yeah. So in terms of the invisible faults of anger, is that, like I was saying before, even if you have not acted out verbally or physically in a negative way, just by having the anger within your mind, what you do is you place a seed, what we call a seed or a potency, within your mind for a negative result that you yourself have to experience in the future. So this is the way that karmic cause and effect works. So just as like a show of hands, how many of you have feel like good understanding of the way that karmic cause and effect works? You have a fairly good understanding? Okay. Yes, got some thumbs up there. Deb, is that a hand up or is that a thumbs up? So thumbs up, okay. So you guys then will therefore be, I imagine, kind of familiar with, if I just, let's go whiteboard for a second. So I do like to have a visual representation of this. It sort of makes it easier to understand. Just a sec. How can I do? All right. Can you see that whiteboard okay? Okay. Oh. Okay. So the way that we explain whether it's a positive result or a negative result that arises for us, so a feeling of happiness or a feeling of suffering, whichever it is, it arises in dependence upon an action that we ourselves have done in the past. So we would say in terms of anger, so anger. So anger is a mental event. It's a mental event. And in dependence upon anger, then you might have like a physical or a verbal action. And in dependence upon that physical or verbal action, so like I was saying, maybe you strike out with your body or you say something nasty with your speech. So we would say that in this case, your physical or verbal action, so that's obviously a physical or verbal action. But here with anger, you already have a mental action. Right. There's a bit more to it in terms of the explanation if you go into more detail about how karmic cause and effect works, but we're just going with a simple presentation. So there are three types of actions that you can do. So action is the English word for the Sanskrit word karma. So we all have heard about karma, right? Endlessly. This is a thing that people like to say a lot. Oh, it's just your karma, right? Even non-Buddhists will say it's just your karma. Well, the actual karma is the action itself. So when we talk about karma, people often apply it to the result that you experience. Something negative happens to you and you go, oh, that's your karma, right? The actual karma was the initial action. So it's either a mental action or it's a physical and verbal action. In fact, if it's a physical or verbal action, it's necessarily going to also involve some kind of mental action that's occurred as well, right? So what happens is on the basis of these actions, so in this case, we have anger, and there's a mental action that you accumulate there. On the basis of that, then you might engage or you might not engage in a physical or verbal action. And what these actions, whether they're mental actions, physical or verbal actions, do is they place potency in the mind. So what that potency is what we call it is a seed. It's just called a seed, and it's not like a physical seed, like, apple seed or watermelon seed or something like that. It's not that kind of a seed. It's actually something that is non-physical. It's a potency of mind, and it has the potential to give rise to a particular result. So what that result will be will depend on the action itself. So in this case, it will be a negative result. So that because the original action is negative. So a negative type of result will be a result of suffering. Does it make sense? Is this something that you have any doubts about? I can only see some of your faces while I'm doing whiteboard. So if you have any doubts, or you have any queries, then please just jump in. I'm totally happy for us to have discussion as we go. In fact, I really like having discussion as we go. Cynthia, you have a question, doubt?
Sorry. I was just not a doubt, but I just wonder for people. Again, I'm just reflecting a lot with people that seem to hurt a lot of people. Like they seem to get positive results. Like yeah, that kind of like there seems to be a lot of anger and inflicting pain, and yet how much more anger will result in negative suffering. I can't help think that way because there's so much people that are being affected, and it's very difficult to like I don't know how to feel about those people, like because you can see them and people are affected, so that's very difficult to process. I just wanted.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that point. So this is when we look at it from a Buddhist perspective. I mean, this is why we're here, is we're learning about the Buddhist perspective on these things, aren't we? So the Buddhist perspective is like really broad and vast. It's looking beyond the scope of just this year, just this, stage of life, or even this in life in its entirety. So from the Buddhist perspective, we look at it beyond this life in terms of the scope of many, many other lives. So the lives that we've already lived prior to this one, and then there are the lives that are yet to come beyond this one. So all those lives depend on a stream of mental consciousness. So there is the thing that goes from life to life, the main thing that goes from life to life, is this mental continuum. So that primary consciousness or mind that we have that goes from life to life in an unbroken continuum. So that is not something that depends upon there always being a physical body to go with it. But mostly it will take a physical body life to life to life. And depending on what type of physical body ends up together with the mental continuum, that will inform what kind of person you are in that life. So in this life, we've become human persons because we've come across, or our mental continuum has come across a human body. So we've been really fortunate because having a human body gives us a great deal of opportunity, massive amount of opportunity. With a human body, and especially a human body that has the fortune, like all the conditions together with it, that we have the interest and we have the capacity to learn more about our minds, to learn how we can develop positive minds, how we can stop negative minds. This is something that's really rare, even amongst the types of human that exist in this world. So our mind, we've been really fortunate that our mind is met up with the kind of body that we have in this life. And in dependence upon that, we are human persons like this. But in other lifetimes, we might meet up with different kinds of bodies, like animal bodies. There's like a whole spectrum of different types of births that are explained in the Buddhist literature, from hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, then they've got humans, gods, demigods, and then there are also those type of rebirths that are beyond the scope of those 6 in the form and formless realms as well. Like it's sort of like really broad. So when we're thinking about karmic cause and result, as it's explained here, we think beyond the scope of just a particular period of time in this life. So for instance, Cynthia, you were mentioning somebody who does a very negative action, and yet they seem to have a positive result as a result of that. So from a Buddhist perspective, we would say it's not possible for that result, that positive result, to be an actual result of the negative action that they're doing. So we would say, for instance, so let's say somebody here in this case, so they had anger in their mind, which we're still going to come back and talk about exactly what is anger. And on that basis, then, let's say they killed a person, right? We see heaps of killing going on in the world these days, don't we? There's wars all over the place. Not only wars, there's a whole lot of domestic violence. I don't know. I'm sure it would be the same in America as in Australia. Domestic violence is like a really big issue, violence against women. There's so many women that die at the hands of their male partners here, definitely. So doesn't have to be just in war, can be like even within what's supposed to be a safe space within your home, right? So somebody, on the basis of getting angry, then engaged in action of killing another person. So we say that action then placed this potency within the mind, which will give rise to a negative result of suffering for them in the future. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will experience the result of that particular action in the same life that they committed the action. So this result can happen, the following life. It could happen many lives down the track. There's no certainty as to when it's going to occur. There is a certainty, however, and the basic principle of cause and effect is that a cause and an effect have to be of compatible type. So just even like in science, right? You know, the whole process of alchemy is impossible, isn't it? You can't get gold from lead. I think that's the way that alchemy works, isn't it? In the old days, they, you know, talk about alchemy as like you transform lead or something like that into gold. Those two substances are of like different substantial type. So there's no way to make something precious like gold from something that is less precious like lead. So the same principle is applied also to internal cause and effect, which we call karmic cause and effect. So internal cause and effect is this cause and effect process that happens in terms of actions that we engage in and the results that we experience on the basis of those actions. So likewise, for that internal karmic cause and effect, there has to be compatibility between a cause and its substantial result, like the result that is directly connected to that. So in this example we've got here, where through anger, somebody kills a person and that places a potency within the mind, the result is going to be a similar type to that cause, which was negative. So the result will also be negative. So in the example of somebody like here, perhaps they even get away. We say get away with killing that person. What we mean when we say they get away with it is that they don't get caught by the police and they don't get put in jail. That does not mean that they've gotten away with the action in a broader karmic sense. So to get away with it in a broader karmic sense would mean that you don't ever experience the result of that, which we would say is impossible. So what has happened in that case is that a person, in this case, who's killed a person, maybe they've, they get to, instead of from this immediate thing of killing the person, instead of going to jail, instead they live a, let's say, a free life. And they're quite happy in that life, right? That is not the karmic result of the killing. That is actually the karmic result of a positive action from the past. Not necessarily in this life, it can be previous lifetimes. So what does it mean, therefore, that this potency that they have within their mind here, that is still sitting in their mind on their mental continuum? What that means is that they still have to experience that result of suffering in a future life. So from a Buddhist perspective, we would say that therefore that person is actually worthy of compassion, not worthy of anger, because they have that result that will lead to an enormous amount of suffering in a future lifetime. Not immediately, but in a future lifetime, it's definitely the case. It's a difficult point, it really doesn't go easily with a worldly view, like the general worldly accepted view in these days, right? The general worldly view is that if somebody does a very negative action, then that person is worthy of our anger. It's worthy of our harm, it's worthy of our vicious thoughts and actions towards them. From a Buddhist perspective, we would say, actually, that person is worthy of our compassion. Now, we've got to separate out what that means between like what happens in our mind and then what you do with your body and your speech. So if somebody does a negative action, like killing, for instance, when we say that person is worthy of our compassion, this is quite actually a complex topic to be talking about in our first class. I didn't think to be talking about this, but here we are. So if you find it confusing, please just ask questions about it. If you disagree with it, please do say something, you know, don't just kind of go, oh, I disagree with that. I can't accept that. I'm going to throw that out. Because these things are really worth thinking about. You know, they're really worth thinking about, even if you're not Buddhist. Because what is the alternative is, if it's the case that you think that a person does a negative action, whether it's to me or another person, right? That person is worthy of my anger. Who is the one that actually loses out if you are angry? You yourself. That's right, Sheila. Yeah. You yourself are the one that incurs the loss if you get angry. Your anger actually, in and of itself, does not harm the perpetrator of that violent act. Your anger harms only yourself. So if you are really wanting happiness for yourself, if you're wanting a peaceful mind for yourself, then really, like, the only choice is to work out, how can I think about this person who's doing a very bad thing in a way that maintains calmness for my mind, that stops my own anger? So that does not mean, therefore, you cannot act, right? So having compassion in your mind and loving kindness in your mind, that does not stop you, that does not preclude any kind of action that would stop the person from engaging in that negative action, right? In Buddhism, we don't say that compassion equates with inaction. We don't say that patience equates with inaction. Loving kindness does not equate with inaction. What you do with your body and your speech depends upon the situation itself. If someone is doing harm to another person, by all means, we should try and stop that, because they are harming not only the other person, but also themselves. If someone is harming you, by all means, you can do something to try and stop that without harming the other person, right? So we should always try and not harm another person or another being, not just people, but beings. What we're talking about when we talk about compassion, loving kindness, patience, this is what happens on the mental level. So like we looked at here, we've got the anger, which is a mental event, and then we've got the physical or verbal action. That's something that is obviously physical or verbal action. What we are wanting to stop or to change is the way we respond in a mental sense. And through the basis of having loving kindness, compassion, patience within our mind, within our heart, then we can check, what is the best thing for me to do physically or verbally in this situation? So does that answer your question, Cynthia?
Yes, it helps. I just maybe have I can address it later, but I kind of understand it intellectually that that is so. How do I guess I'm more in the how do I work? It's a work in progress. How do I work that where I'm uh so I like I seek information so that I can understand this that other person's perspective, but I don't know how to move further from that right now. That's where I'm kind of struggling uh to have that compassion for that person who just killed, for example, in your example. um I can like say, oh, okay, he he or she did this because, so that's kind of trying, I'm almost feel like I'm trying to rationalize the person's actions. I don't know if that's good or bad. So that's kind of where I'm stuck.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So the challenge here, I suppose, is like that you can't actually rationalize a person's actions, right? So I remember one time I was teaching a class in, I think it was on probably loving kindness or compassion. It was one of those ones. And I asked the class, it's like, what would you do if somebody was, let's go with something that's a little bit easier to deal with than killing, because killing's like, you know, quite a big deal, right? So if somebody just says something rude to you, something nasty to you, so what is a different way? What we normally do is we go, oh, that's an awful thing that person said to me. That they're such an awful person. How could they say such a thing? I'm going to say something back, right? That's kind of like the process that we go through. You know, I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to say something back. That'll fix the situation. I mean, it never fixes the situation, but, you know, this is what our anger tells us, is that if I say something nasty back, it'll all be fixed, right? So I asked the class, is like, what would be a different approach that you could take, or what would be a different way of thinking about it that might stop you from going straight to that thought of, I'm going to retaliate? And somebody said, well, could maybe think about like how it is that maybe the person had a bad day. They weren't really meaning it to me. It's not that they really dislike me. It's like, you know, that it was just something else going on in their life that caused them to have a bad day. And then they said that nasty thing. And I said, well, that's okay in some respects. But what if the person actually really dislikes you and they intentionally wanted to harm you? So if that's the case, then what are you going to do? Because your logic goes out the door right at that point, doesn't it? Because sometimes you come across those people, don't you? And it's like sometimes people just don't like you. There's no particular reason, nothing you can particularly put your finger on, just for some reason they've got it in for you, right? Then what do? You cannot rationalize away this kind of action. You can't rationalize that away, that ill will that the person has to you, in the sense of, oh, it's okay for them to have it because blah, blah, blah. They had this trauma in their life, da, 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 da. Ill will is always not okay. Any kind of negative action is always not okay. It's not like we're ever saying that it's okay or it's like a rational thing for a person to behave in this negative way. Not at all. Not at all. What we're trying to do is come to an understanding of why these things arise in a person's mind that cause them to behave physically and verbally in these negative ways. So what we're trying to understand is how all of us, you know, ourselves and everybody else, actually lack control over our own mind. When things like anger arise in our minds, or other things like negative types of mental events, like we can say pride or jealousy, also attachment. So I know attachments are kind of like a controversial word in some respects, because sometimes attachment is seen as positive, you know, in the West. It's got a particular meaning, again, in Buddhist philosophy. But in Buddhism, we consider all of these things to be negative types of emotions. They're called afflictions. When they arise in our minds, they take control. So this is exactly what we talked about at the start, right? Was that when things like anger arise in our mind, they entirely take control of our mind. It's not like, you know, from your own experience, right? Is that when that anger arises in your mind and takes control, it's not like you can just snap your fingers and go, right, that's it, I'm not going to be angry anymore. It doesn't work like that. We are all completely the same in that respect. And then on that basis, we act out negatively in body and speech. So if everybody is the same, actually we all lack control in exactly the same way. And that is why people behave badly. That's why we behave badly. It's why other people behave badly. The sad thing for some people is that they are not, like some people are not at all able to even control the really big physical and verbal actions that they perform. Their anger or their pride or their jealousy or whatever becomes so strong in their mind, and they have no sense of, like, you know, restraint at all. That's like they're just propelled to do these negative actions. The really big ones, you know, like killing, stealing, these kinds of things. So is that not a reason for having compassion for another person? If someone completely lacks control like that, it's not saying that the action is okay. It's not rationalizing the behavior to find a reasonable reason why a person is behaving in that way, because there is no reasonable reason. There's no justifiable reason for a person to behave negatively. There's no justifiable reason for ourselves to behave negatively. It's simply a lack of control. Also, it's a lack of not knowing. Sometimes people don't know what's right and what's wrong. People don't understand like what's an ethical way to live your life. So that also is a reason for compassion. Does that help you at all, Cynthia? Not really. Still working on it. Have we lost Cynthia?
Yes, it does.
Michael, oh, it does help? Okay.
I will
Keep-
reflect on it. It's helpful. Thank you.
Keep thinking about it. Like this, it is not easy. Actually, this point is really not easy. In fact, it's like, it's quite a, it's, I would say, I go so far as saying it's kind of an advanced mind training practice, this particular practice. And we're discussing it in this first class. And so I'm probably the one to blame that we've decided we've gone down this track. We've gone down this track. But this is something that is really worthwhile thinking. And there's a lot to think about in terms of cause and effect, why we experience happiness, why we experience suffering. What's a reason for having compassion for a person as opposed to having anger for a person? You know, what's reasonable? What's justifiable? How do our own minds work? I mean, really, when you think about it, people who engage in these negative actions, something like, starting these major wars and all of this kind of thing. So it's almost like you could say, if we were in a similar situation in terms of our upbringing, in terms of the various conditions that we've met earlier in life, there's a fair chance that we would have ended up like those people. We've been really lucky because we've all got the potency for anger. We've all got those potential for all of these kind of negative states of mind within us. And we've been really fortunate that we've met enough positive conditions that have helped us to direct our mind in a positive way, to be generally quite good people, even though sometimes we behave negatively. We've been really fortunate. If we had have met other conditions earlier in our life, things might have turned out quite differently for us. Does that mean, therefore, if we had been like that, we're not worthy of others' compassion? Not worthy of others' love? It's an interesting point to reflect on, right? So, Michael, you have a question.
Yes, thanks. We're talking about that concept of anger taking over the mind and learning, hopefully, to be able to understand that and to help control it so that it doesn't lead us to the physical expression, the verbal negative action from that, which then leads to potency, that is the seed. However, if we get to a point where we get better at recognizing anger before it becomes physical, is that still the mental action, the mental event that we have on this chart? Does that also lead to potency as well within the mind because that anger is still there?
Yeah, so this is a good point. Okay, so for this then, to discuss this point, I need to add a little bit more in the chart. Hang on, I might just rub out some of these bits and just get rid of this. It's getting a bit messy, isn't it? I'm quite new to using iPad as a whiteboard. I'm much more used to a physical whiteboard. Where I currently teach, I had a physical whiteboard for years, and then they decided there was no room for it. And so in our new premises, I have to use a digital whiteboard. And I've got to say, it makes me feel very old because I'm not good. I'm not good at the digital stuff. All right. So actually, in terms of this process, we have to also add a step here. in the process of this whole thing. Okay, so ignorance. Again, why am I going into such great detail of these points that are actually a bit difficult? All right, so this one, ignorance, you can say underpins all our actions. We'll come back to this down the track, all right? So don't worry about it too much, what that ignorance involves. We will discuss it later on. But basically, it's because we have this fundamental underlying innate ignorance within our minds that makes a mistake as to the way everything exists, then we end up with all these afflictions like anger and so forth that arise in our mind. But don't worry, we'll come back to that. So in terms of somebody who is starting to work on their mind, they're starting to reduce their anger, and they're starting to even transform their mind so that they no longer have so much anger, that they have more loving kindness, more patience, more compassion, right? So at the start of this process, as you're working on your mind, what you'll probably find is that anger still arises, but you're less likely to straight away say something nasty, retaliate through words, or retaliate physically. So that's probably the first thing that's going to happen. So what happens is through understanding, probably it comes through understanding that these negative actions, like retaliating through words and through retaliating through physical action, cause harm to others around us, and they cause long-term harm to ourselves by placing that seed potency within our mind, right? So through understanding that, you're able to restrain your speech and you're able to restrain your physical actions. So what you do is you're kind of putting a block between your anger and then the physical and verbal actions that come on the basis of that. So this is a good start, really excellent start. And it's much easier to restrain actions of body and speech. And so this is really why that happens first in this process. So what will happen then is that if you manage to put a block between your anger and your physical and verbal actions, it means that you won't have any, place any potencies that come from the physical and verbal action. But as you said, you still have placed a potency in your mind just through the anger itself. So there is still, we would say, a negative or a seed of a negative karmic seed that is placed within your mind just on the basis of the anger. So then you keep working at your anger, you keep working to reduce it, and we're still yet to talk about the methods by which we'll go and do that. We talked a little bit about loving kindness and compassion. But what will happen over time is that you'll be able to recognize anger, not when it's already arisen in your mind, but when it's on the verge of arising in your mind. So you'll start to see that maybe there's some displeasure. So anger comes from displeasure. So you'll see that there's displeasure that's arisen in your mind, and that anger is on the verge. So this is why we need to talk about exactly what anger is, because otherwise you can mix up displeasure and anger and think that when you're displeased with something, you're already angry. But really, displeasure comes first. So you see this displeasure arises in your mind, you see that anger is on the horizon, and what you're able to do is head off that displeasure at the pass, right? So you stop it from turning from displeasure into anger, and you divert your mind in a positive direction instead. So what you're doing there is you're putting a block between ignorance and anger. So, and you might do that through, heading off your mind to loving kindness or compassion or patience. I mean, these are all interrelated, etc., right? So there's different tools that you might use at this point. And so what you've done then is you've stopped any of these negative karmic seeds from being accumulated. And actually, what you've done is you've placed, you have placed a potency in your mind, but in this case, it will lead to a positive result, which will be happiness. So this is kind of a process that we go through, and it doesn't all happen, you know, at once. It's a slow process. You'll see a gradual decline in your negative actions of body and speech. You'll see a reduction in the strength and your and the frequency of your anger, and you'll start to see that you are opening up opportunities before you get angry to do something in your mind when anger is on the horizon. This is like the gradual process that will occur. Definitely will occur. If you put the work in, it'll happen for sure. It's just how much effort you put into this process. Yeah. So then what does that mean? If you are able to put a block there before the anger even arises, is that it means you start to have some control over your mind. You are the one more in control of whether you have happiness or whether you have suffering, both in the short term, because with patience, loving kindness, compassion, your mind will be happier, your mind will be calmer, you'll be placing seeds for future happiness, not for future suffering. So there's so many benefits that come from this. Also, it opens up the opportunity for you to react to the situation you find yourself in that is in a way that's got some control to it, you know, rather than just being uncontrolled in the control of anger and the grips of anger. Instead, when you're controlled by loving kindness and compassion, you can choose what is the most appropriate course of action with my body and speech. So is the most appropriate course of action in my body and speech something gentle, or like, for instance, running away from the situation? Is it that I need to actually say something to that person out of loving kindness and compassion? Maybe I need to say something quite forcefully out of loving kindness and compassion for that person. You have many more tools at your disposal if your mind is under control, under the control of loving kindness, compassion, and patience. Yeah. So, Michael, does that answer your question?
Very much. Thank you. Very much.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the share of that whiteboard. All right. So it's almost 1:30. Oh, I was going to say 1:30, but of course it's not 1:30 your time, it's 1:30 my time. Okay, so it's almost 8:30 your time. So we better sort of finish up there. Have a good think over the next week. Have a really good think about what all the faults of anger that you can think of in your own mind, like the ones that we talked about that are visible, and also the ones that are invisible. We didn't finish talking about all the invisible faults of anger, but these ones to do with how it places this potency for a negative result in our mind. Just have a think about it and think and analyze how that sits in your mind. And if there are any questions that come up for you in relation to that, you know, we can address that next week. And then also try and have an idea, you know, even visualize what would your mind be like if you didn't have anger in your mind. If you could have your mind just full with loving kindness, compassion, that affection for others, regardless of what they do, what would that be like to have that kind of a mind? I think it's really worthwhile having an idea of what it is that we're working towards, what that might feel like for you, so that you can really get this sense of a strong sense of like not wanting the anger at all to remain in your mind and really wanting to develop this very positive type of mind. So have a think about that over the next week. And so next week we will start talking about exactly what anger is and what it is not. We did touch on it a bit today, and also exactly what patience is. And we'll start to have a discussion about these tools that we can use from the 4 types of patience. Do you have any questions before we finish? Is this a helpful approach for you? So I want to make sure that it's like, addressing your needs. Yeah, okay, some thumbs up, I hope so. All right, thank you. Well, it's lovely to meet you all. And so before we finish, we'll just finish off with the final prayers, which we use to dedicate any kind of merit that we accumulate through this discussion of patience and what anger is and so forth, so that we dedicate this to the highest kind of a mind. So ideally, from a Buddhist perspective, we want to try and attain the state of a Buddha, because that's where we have the greatest potential or capacity to help others. So that's really what we want to try and dedicate it to. But then if we dedicate all those merits to attaining that high state of a Buddha, then on the way, we will develop greater and greater capacity all the way up to the state of a Buddha. So that's why we make these dedication prayers. So we'll recite them in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.